The great white shark kills roughly a handful of people globally in an average year. It became one of the most feared animals on Earth. Films were made about it. Entire generations grew up afraid of it. The word shark to most people means danger in the water. Meanwhile, something else has been moving through the same coastal waters. The shallow reefs, the tidal channels, the mangrove edges where millions of people fish and swim and work every single day, and almost nobody talks about it. It is not a shark, it is a snake. Sea snakes are responsible for tens of thousands of envenomations every year across South and Southeast Asia and the Pacific. Most of those incidents never make international news. Many are never formally recorded at all. The people most at risk are the ones who spend their lives in the water. Fishermen, divers, coastal communities, in regions where the animal is common and where almost nobody is afraid of it the way they are afraid of a shark. The venom some of these animals carry is extraordinary. Not in the way the word is usually used casually, genuinely, measurably extraordinary. Among the most potent produced by any snake anywhere on Earth, and yet the sea snake became one of the least feared predators in the ocean, in the same shallow water where the most feared one became a cultural obsession. Tonight, we're exploring how a land reptile transformed into one of the ocean's most extraordinary hunters. Now let's begin. A coastline at low tide can make the distinction difficult to see. A narrow body slips between coral heads, disappears beneath a ripple of reflected sunlight, and for a moment seems no different from any other marine animal adapted to life in shallow water. Yet beneath that familiar outline lies one of the most extraordinary evolutionary transitions ever completed by a vertebrate. Sea snakes are often imagined as ordinary snakes that simply learn to swim. The reality is far stranger. They represent a lineage that crossed a boundary few land animals have ever crossed successfully, then spent millions of years being reshaped by an environment that obeys entirely different rules. What we casually call sea snakes are actually divided into two separate groups. The first are the sea kraits, members of the subfamily Laticodinae. They spend much of their lives hunting in coastal waters, threading through reefs and rocky channels with remarkable ease, yet they remain tied to the land. They return ashore to lay eggs, rest, and carry out parts of their life cycle that the ocean still cannot provide. Their relationship with the sea is deep, but incomplete, like a traveler who has settled in a distant place while keeping one foot in the old homeland. The second group followed a different path. These are the true sea snakes, members of the subfamily Hydrophinae. For them, the separation from land became nearly absolute. They are born in the ocean, hunt in the ocean, reproduce in the ocean, and die in the ocean. No beach waits for them. No shoreline marks a necessary destination. Among all reptiles on Earth, they stand alone in completing their entire life cycle without ever needing to leave the water. Their range stretches across an immense expanse of the planet. More than 70 recognized species inhabit tropical and subtropical waters from the eastern coast of Africa across the Indian Ocean through Southeast Asia and the Western Pacific and onward toward the Gulf of Panama, across reefs, estuaries, lagoons, mangrove channels, and coastal shallows. They occupy a domain that spans thousands of miles and countless ecosystems. In many places, they are among the most common large reptiles in the environment, existing alongside human communities that have shared the same waters for generations. Their ancestry places them within the family Elapidae, a group that includes cobras, mambas, coral snakes, and taipans. This family is renowned for venom systems refined through long evolutionary histories, producing some of the most sophisticated biochemical weapons known in the animal kingdom. Sea snakes inherited that foundation, but inheritance alone does not explain what they became. The ocean imposed its own demands. Every challenge, from movement and breathing to hunting and survival, pushed these animals in new directions. Over time, the results ceased to resemble a simple marine version of a terrestrial snake. The transformation reached far beyond habitat. Bodies changed, senses changed, physiology changed, behaviors changed. Traits that once served life on land were modified, reduced, or replaced, while entirely new solutions emerged in response to the pressures of the sea. The animal that entered the water millions of years ago and the animal drifting through a modern coral reef are separated by far more than time. Seen this way, a sea snake is not a sea creature that happens to resemble a snake. It is the living record of a conquest. An ancient terrestrial predator crossed into an unfamiliar world and remained there long enough for the ocean to rewrite it. Everything that distinguishes sea snakes today, their biology, their capabilities, and their extraordinary place within marine ecosystems, began with that transformation and continues to carry its imprint in every movement through the water. Long before any living sea snake drifted through a reef or crossed a tropical lagoon, the story began with an opportunity. Along the margins of what is now Southeast Asia, where coastlines shifted with changing seas and sunlight reached deep into clear shallows, terrestrial elapid snakes encountered a world overflowing with food. Fish crowded sheltered waters. Reef systems stretched across vast distances. Beneath the surface existed an ecological landscape rich with prey and remarkably open to a new kind of predator. At the center of this transformation lay the region now known as the Coral Triangle. Covering roughly 5.7 million square miles, it remains the most biologically diverse marine ecosystem on Earth. Thousands of reef species inhabit its warm waters, creating a level of ecological complexity unmatched anywhere else in the ocean. Millions of years ago, that abundance offered possibilities unavailable on land. For a snake capable of exploiting shallow coastal habitats, every inlet, reef edge, and mangrove channel represented a new frontier. The ancestors that entered these waters were already accomplished hunters. They belonged to the elapid family, carrying the venom systems and predatory instincts that had served them well on land. Yet the ocean imposed entirely different demands. A fish does not move like a rodent. Water does not behave like air. Every pursuit required new solutions, and every successful hunt rewarded individuals that could navigate this unfamiliar environment a little more effectively than those around them. The transition did not happen in a single leap. It unfolded gradually across immense stretches of time. Some populations ventured into coastal waters only temporarily, maintaining a close relationship with the shore. Others pushed farther outward, spending increasing portions of their lives at sea. Generation after generation, natural selection worked quietly. Small advantages accumulated. Traits that improved survival in water became more common. Traits tied exclusively to life on land slowly lost their importance. Modern genomic studies have helped illuminate this deep history. Research published during the early decades of the 21st century traced the divergence of sea snakes from terrestrial Australasian elapids back to the early Miocene. The split occurred approximately 15 million years ago, placing the origins of sea snakes within a period when tropical marine ecosystems were expanding and evolving rapidly across the Indo-Pacific region. Even then, evolution followed more than one path. Some lineages retained a lasting connection to land. These would eventually become the sea kraits, animals that still return ashore as part of their life cycle. Other lineages continued moving toward complete marine existence. With each passing million years, Their dependence on terrestrial environments weakened. Shorelines became less necessary. The sea itself became home. Remarkably, many modern sea snake species are geologically young. A significant portion evolved within the last 1 to 3 million years, an interval that is brief by evolutionary standards. This relative youth helps explain why their adaptations often appear so striking. The transition remains visible, almost as though the process has not yet faded into the deeper obscurity of geological time. Their bodies still carry clues to where they came from and how recently the transformation occurred. What emerged from this history was far more than a land snake that learned to swim. The ocean acted as a powerful evolutionary filter, shaping anatomy, physiology, behavior, and sensory systems through countless generations. Genes associated with survival in marine environments underwent selection and modification. New biological pathways expanded, while older ones diminished. The result was not merely adaptation, but reconstruction. Seen across millions of years, the movement into the sea resembles less a migration and more a gradual surrender to a different set of rules. The animals that entered coastal waters were terrestrial predators. The animals that emerged from the process belonged to the ocean. Between those two forms lies a long evolutionary conversation carried out across reefs, tides, and warm tropical seas, written quietly into the genome of every sea snake alive today. Evolution rarely starts over. It works with what already exists, reshaping old structures into new forms, preserving fragments of the past even as an animal moves into an entirely different world. In sea snakes, that long process remains visible across the body itself, as though the ocean left its fingerprints on every scale, every organ, and every movement. The tail offers one of the clearest examples. A terrestrial snake pushes against soil, rocks, roots, and vegetation, converting muscle into forward motion through contact with the ground. Water provides no such surface. For a snake entering the sea, movement demanded a different solution. Over millions of years, the tail broadened and flattened from side to side until it resembled the blade of an oar. Rather than simply trailing behind the body, it became an active propulsive structure, sweeping through the water with remarkable efficiency. The result is a form of locomotion that allows true sea snakes to travel with a grace and economy of motion impossible for their terrestrial relatives. Poem. Inside the body, a similar transformation unfolded. Most land snakes possess paired lungs, with one often reduced in size. True sea snakes followed a different path. Their respiratory system stretched and elongated until a single lung extended through much of the body cavity. This remarkable structure serves not only as a breathing organ, but also as a reservoir of stored oxygen. With every breath taken at the surface, a sea snake carries a supply of air distributed through much of its length, turning the body itself into part of the diving apparatus. The transition reached even the smallest details. At the tip of the snout sit specialized nostril valves capable of sealing completely when submerged. The movement is simple and automatic, yet it solves a problem that every marine air breather must overcome. Water remains outside, air remains inside. A boundary is maintained between two worlds that constantly press against one another. At the same time, features essential on land began to fade. Terrestrial snakes rely on broad belly scales, known as scutes, to grip surfaces and generate traction. In the sea, such structures offered little advantage. Across many species, these scales became greatly reduced or disappeared almost entirely. The consequence is striking. An animal capable of moving effortlessly through water often appears awkward and nearly helpless when placed on solid ground. Evolution had little reason to preserve abilities that the ocean no longer required. Coloration changed as well. Many sea snakes display a pattern known as countershading. The upper surface of the body tends toward darker tones, while the underside remains pale. Seen from above, the darker back blends into deeper water below. Seen from beneath, the lighter belly merges with the brighter water near the surface. It is a form of camouflage shared with many marine animals, allowing the body to dissolve subtly into its surroundings. Some species went even further, acquiring sensory capabilities uncommon among reptiles. Embedded within their scales are receptors sensitive to faint changes in water pressure. A distant movement, a shifting current, or the passage of another animal can leave delicate signatures in the surrounding water. These signals ripple outward and are detected through the skin, providing information carried not by sight or sound, but by movement itself. The annulated sea snake reveals another layer of refinement. Across its forehead and snout runs a dense network of blood vessels, unlike anything seen in most terrestrial snakes. This vascular system appears to channel additional oxygen toward the brain during prolonged dives, helping sustain neural activity when the animal remains submerged for extended periods. Such adaptations help explain an observation that surprised researchers in the year 2019. Sea snakes were documented descending beyond 200 meters, entering depths where sunlight dwindles toward darkness and the familiar brightness of shallow seas gives way to a dim blue twilight. The discovery suggested that some species venture far deeper than previously believed, carrying bodies shaped by millions of years of adjustment into regions once thought beyond their reach. For most animals that live permanently beneath the surface, the solution appears obvious. Fish draw oxygen from water through gills. Marine mammals return to breathe air. Each follows a clear biological path. Sea snakes occupy a quieter and more unusual middle ground, carrying the inheritance of a terrestrial ancestor into an environment that should have made that inheritance a liability. Every descent begins with a breath taken at the surface. Unlike fish, sea snakes possess no gills hidden beneath scales or protective plates. The oxygen they rely upon enters the body through lungs, just as it does in a snake moving across dry land. Once submerged, that stored supply becomes finite. Time begins to matter. Every movement, every change in depth, every pulse of muscle draws from a reserve that cannot be replenished until the animal rises again. Yet the limits are surprisingly generous. Many species remain underwater for close to half an hour on a single breath. Under calm conditions, with activity reduced and metabolism slowed, some individuals have been recorded staying submerged for nearly 2 hours. Such durations stretch far beyond what might be expected from an air-breathing reptile and hint that something more complicated is taking place beneath the scales. The secret lies not only in the lungs, but in the skin itself. Across much of the animal's body, the skin is unusually permeable compared with that of most reptiles. Beneath the outer layer runs a dense network of tiny blood vessels, positioned close enough to the surrounding water that gases can move across the boundary separating body and environment. Oxygen dissolved in seawater gradually diffuses inward, entering the bloodstream directly through the skin. This process, known as cutaneous respiration, transforms the entire body into part of the respiratory system. The snake still depends on lungs, but those lungs no longer carry the entire burden alone. In some species, roughly 1/3 of total oxygen requirements can be supplied through the skin. The contribution is not large enough to eliminate the need for breathing air, yet it is substantial enough to extend dives well beyond what lung capacity alone could support. The exchange works in both directions. Carbon dioxide, The waste product generated by metabolism also passes through the skin. In fact, sea snakes appear even more efficient at removing carbon dioxide than they are at acquiring oxygen. Studies suggest that as much as 9/10 of their carbon dioxide may leave the body through this route. The surrounding water becomes a vast medium for gas exchange, quietly assisting the respiratory process with every passing moment beneath the surface. Within certain species, the system reaches an even higher degree of refinement. The annulated sea snake possesses a remarkable network of blood vessels spread across the head and snout. These vessels appear to function as an auxiliary pathway for oxygen delivery, helping ensure that the brain continues receiving an adequate supply during prolonged dives. While the rest of the body conserves energy and slows its demands, the nervous system remains supported by this specialized circulation. The combined effect of these adaptations is subtle but profound. Oxygen enters through more than one route. Waste gases leave with unusual efficiency. Metabolic activity can be reduced when conditions allow. Each modification contributes a small advantage, and together they create an animal capable of remaining submerged far longer than its ancestry would seem to permit. Nothing about this system resembles the elegant simplicity of gills. Instead, it reflects a series of evolutionary compromises layered upon one another across immense spans of time. The lungs remained, the need for air remained, yet around those constraints, natural selection assembled an intricate workaround. Over roughly 15 million years, sea snakes developed a method of underwater existence that does not fully abandon life as a terrestrial reptile and does not fully embrace the biological solutions of fish. It occupies a narrow space between the two, sustained by skin, blood, breath, and patience beneath the sea. Some evolutionary inventions emerge from abundance. Others emerge from urgency. The venom carried by sea snakes belongs to the second category, shaped by a problem that could not be solved through speed, strength, or persistence alone. In the open water of tropical seas, prey does not stumble, hesitate, or become trapped against a solid surface. A fish startled by danger can vanish in an instant, disappearing into distance before a predator has time for a second attempt. For an ancestral snake entering this environment, that reality imposed a severe constraint. On land, a snake may seize an animal and maintain contact. The surrounding terrain helps contain movement. In water, everything changes. The medium itself supports escape. A captured fish can twist free and propel itself away with explosive force. Even a brief delay can mean failure. Success depends on ending the chase almost immediately. Natural selection responded with extraordinary precision. Over millions of years, the venom system became increasingly specialized for marine hunting. Rather than functioning as a general-purpose weapon, it evolved into a highly refined biochemical tool designed to stop prey before distance could intervene. The objective was not prolonged injury or gradual incapacitation. The objective was immediate control. The resulting venom is dominated by two powerful categories of toxins working together. One acts upon the communication pathways that allow the body to move. The other targets the muscles themselves. Their combined effect creates a level of efficiency rarely matched elsewhere in the animal kingdom. Neurotoxins move first. These compounds interfere with the signals traveling between nerves and muscles, disrupting the delicate electrical conversations that make coordinated movement possible. A fish may remain conscious, yet the commands sent by its nervous system fail to reach the tissues required for escape. Motion fades. Control disappears. The body becomes unable to respond with the speed that survival demands. Alongside them operate myotoxins, Molecules that attack muscle tissue directly, cell membranes break apart, structural integrity collapses, proteins spill into the bloodstream as the affected tissue begins to deteriorate. In larger animals, including humans, this process can place enormous strain on the kidneys as they attempt to filter the resulting flood of cellular debris. Together, these toxins create a system optimized for the marine world. One disrupts movement at its source, the other damages the machinery of movement itself. The prey does not need to be pursued for long because the venom assumes responsibility for the chase. The potency of this venom is equally remarkable. Measured through laboratory assessments of toxicity, sea snake venom ranks among the most powerful known from any snake. Many species possess venom estimated to be roughly 10 times more potent than that of a cobra. Among them, Dubois' sea snake, found in waters surrounding Papua New Guinea, New Caledonia, and Australia, occupies a particularly notable position. Its venom has produced an estimated median lethal dose of approximately 0.044 milligrams per kilogram, making it one of the most toxic snake venoms ever recorded. Part of this potency may reflect the unique physics of the environment in which it evolved. On land, venom enters tissue with relatively little interference. In water, the situation is less straightforward. The surrounding seawater can dilute venom during the brief moments surrounding a strike, reducing concentration before complete absorption occurs. Over evolutionary time, this challenge appears to have favored toxins capable of remaining effective even when partially dispersed. The ocean did not merely tolerate venom, it exerted pressure upon it, encouraging ever greater biochemical strength. The result is a weapon of extraordinary concentration. A single venom gland may contain enough toxin to kill dozens of adult humans under laboratory estimates. Yet that immense power was never crafted with human beings in mind. Its true target has always been smaller, faster, and infinitely more difficult to hold. Every molecule reflects millions of years spent solving the same problem: how to stop a fleeing fish before the water carries it away. Numbers often create expectations. When an animal possesses one of the most potent venoms known in nature, the mind instinctively imagines long casualty lists, crowded medical records, and a constant stream of documented fatalities. Yet sea snakes occupy a strangely different reality. Their venom ranks among the most powerful biological weapons ever measured, but the official record of human deaths remains unexpectedly small. The contradiction sits quietly at the center of their story, and the closer it is examined, the more complex it becomes. Part of the explanation begins inside the venom gland itself. Producing venom is not a trivial task. Every drop represents an investment of proteins, energy, and biological resources. The toxins that accumulated through millions of years of evolution are valuable to the animal that carries them. They are tools for survival, not substances to be wasted carelessly. Because of this, a bite does not always mean envenomation. Sea snakes are capable of delivering what researchers call dry bites, encounters in which the animal strikes but injects little or no venom. The physical action occurs, the teeth penetrate the skin, yet the biochemical weapon remains largely unused. A significant proportion of defensive bites appear to fall into this category. This behavior reveals something subtle about the interaction between predator and intruder. The snake is not operating as a simple mechanical device that automatically empties its venom supply whenever disturbed. Instead, evidence suggests a degree of modulation. When facing a human, an organism far too large to consume and generally irrelevant as prey, the snake may withhold its most valuable resource. Venom that could be essential for future hunting is conserved rather than spent. In this sense, the outcome of an encounter is influenced by more than the potency of the toxin itself. It is influenced by the animal's assessment of the situation. The venom exists. The capacity to use it exists. Yet the full response is not always deployed. Between possession and release lies a biological decision shaped by context and circumstance. That alone would help explain why fatalities remain lower than expected, but it is only part of the picture. The second layer of the paradox unfolds far from research laboratories and medical journals. It exists in fishing villages, coastal communities, and remote shorelines scattered across the Indo-Pacific. Most sea snake bites do not occur in places with extensive reporting systems. They occur among fishermen hauling nets, untangling lines, sorting catches, and working daily in waters where sea snakes are common. Across parts of India, Southeast Asia, and the Pacific, encounters are woven into ordinary life. Medical facilities may be distant, transportation may be limited, formal documentation may never occur. As a result, many envenomations leave no trace in international databases. Researchers have long suggested that the true number of bites is vastly higher than official figures indicate. Estimates often reach into the tens of thousands annually, with a large proportion never entering any centralized record. The event happens, treatment is sought locally if available, and the incident disappears from the global accounting of dangerous animal encounters. Within this hidden landscape, one species appears repeatedly. The beaked sea snake, Hydrophis schistosus, inhabits coastal waters where human activity is especially concentrated. Medical literature frequently associates it with serious envenomation and a significant share of documented deaths. Yet outside specialist circles, its name remains largely absent from public discussions of ocean danger. The result is a statistical illusion. Official numbers suggest rarity. Daily reality in many coastal regions tells a different story. The discrepancy emerges not because the venom lacks power, nor because encounters fail to occur, but because much of the evidence exists beyond the systems designed to count it. Sea snakes inhabit a world where biology is visible, while the consequences are often hidden, carried quietly through communities that seldom appear in the records used to measure risk. Distance has a way of softening attention. An animal imagined far offshore, hidden in remote depths beyond ordinary experience, becomes easy to place outside daily life. Much of the public image surrounding sea snakes rests on this quiet assumption, the idea that they belong to a separate ocean, a deeper and more inaccessible realm that exists somewhere beyond the places people actually enter. The reality is far less distant. For most sea snake species, the preferred world lies close to shore. The overwhelming majority inhabit waters shallower than roughly 30 meters, occupying the same vertical space used by swimmers, snorkelers, divers, and coastal fishermen. Their domain is not the abyss. It is the sunlit margin where land and sea remain in constant conversation, where tides reshape shorelines and marine life gathers in extraordinary density. Across tropical coastlines, sea snakes move through habitats that humans visit every day. Coral reefs provide shelter, hunting grounds, and complex networks of crevices through which their slender bodies can pass with ease. Mangrove channels offer winding corridors rich with prey. Tidal estuaries create zones where fresh and salt water mingle, producing productive ecosystems crowded with fish and invertebrates. Sandy shallows, often appearing empty from above, form another part of this interconnected landscape. These are not isolated locations. They are among the most frequently used marine environments on Earth. Families wade through them. Fishing boats cross them before sunrise. Divers descend into them, carrying cameras and tanks. In many regions, sea snakes and humans occupy the same waters continuously, often without either being fully aware of the other's presence. One species demonstrates the scale of this distribution particularly well. The yellow-bellied sea snake, Hydrophis platurus, has achieved a geographic range unmatched by any other reptile. Its presence extends across enormous portions of the Indo-Pacific, reaching from Southeast Asia through vast stretches of open ocean and along the western coastlines of the Americas. Populations occur near Hawaii, Costa Rica, Panama, and numerous regions between. Few reptiles have ever occupied such an immense portion of the planet's surface. Unlike most of its relatives, this species abandoned even the loose attachment to coastal habitats. It spends its entire life at sea, drifting upon currents that circle tropical oceans. Floating debris, convergence zones, and narrow surface slicks become temporary worlds through which it travels. There are times when these current lines accumulate extraordinary numbers of individuals. Observers have documented aggregations numbering in the thousands, long ribbons of yellow-bellied sea snakes carried together by the movement of water itself. Yet even this exceptional species highlights a broader pattern. Sea snakes are not primarily animals of inaccessible depths. They are creatures of proximity. Their evolutionary success emerged within environments that remain closely tied to coastlines and shallow marine ecosystems. This creates an interesting contrast with the animal that dominates popular imagination. Many shark species spend substantial portions of their lives in open water, offshore environments, or deeper habitats beyond the places where most people swim on a typical day. Certain species certainly enter coastal waters, but the broader image of sharks remains associated with expanses of ocean stretching beyond sight of land. Sea snakes occupy a different geography. Their territory overlaps directly with the places humans most frequently use. Reef edges, tidal flats, sheltered bays, mangrove systems, and nearshore waters form the core of their world. These habitats support dense populations of fish and other prey, making them ideal environments for a predator that evolved to hunt within complex coastal ecosystems. Seen from this perspective, the map of marine encounters shifts subtly. The animal sharing the water with coastal communities across much of the Indo-Pacific is often not the large silhouette imagined in open ocean narratives. More often, it is a slender reptile moving quietly through the same shallow seas that have supported human activity for thousands of years. Visibility shapes perception more than most people realize. In the natural world, large animals often announce themselves long before they arrive. Their movement alters the environment around them. Water shifts. Shadows pass across the sea floor. Shapes emerge from the blue with enough warning for other creatures to react. Many of the predators that dominate human imagination belong to this category, their presence detectable before any direct encounter takes place. Sea snakes followed a different evolutionary path. Rather than becoming larger, louder, or easier to notice, they became increasingly difficult to see. Their bodies are narrow, often little wider than a finger through much of their length, allowing them to move through spaces inaccessible to larger marine predators. Where a broad body creates disturbance, a slender one slips through the water with minimal displacement. The surrounding environment remains almost unchanged as they pass. Their coloration contributes to this quiet disappearance. Many species carry bands, rings, or irregular patterns that interrupt the outline of the body. Against reefs, patches of sand, broken coral, and shifting light, these markings fragment the animal's shape into smaller visual pieces. Instead of presenting a clear silhouette, the snake dissolves into the complexity of its surroundings. The effect becomes even more pronounced in coastal waters, where visibility is naturally reduced. Suspended sediment, plankton, organic material, and constantly changing light conditions create environments where outlines soften and details vanish. In these conditions, the counter-shaded bodies discussed earlier become extraordinarily difficult to distinguish from the water around them. A darker upper surface blends into deeper tones below, while a lighter underside merges with brightness filtering down from above. The body ceases to stand apart from the environment and instead becomes part of it. This concealment extends beyond appearance. Sea snakes often hunt by exploring the hidden architecture of their habitat. They investigate narrow openings, probe beneath coral structures, search through rocky cavities, and move across sediments where prey may be concealed from ordinary view. Their method of hunting does not rely on dramatic pursuits across open water. It depends upon patience, precision, and access to places where other predators cannot easily follow. As a result, their movements can appear strangely unpredictable. A snake searching through a network of crevices may disappear completely from sight, only to emerge from another opening several feet away. To a small fish attempting escape, the attack can seem to arrive from nowhere at all. The environment itself becomes part of the predator's strategy, concealing its approach until the final moment. Some species possess sensory adaptations that deepen this relationship with hidden spaces. Researchers have identified light-sensitive cells embedded within the skin of the tail in certain sea snakes. These photoreceptors do not create images in the way eyes do. Instead, they appear capable of detecting whether the tail remains exposed to light, while the rest of the body is occupied elsewhere. A snake can keep its tail concealed within shelter while monitoring its degree of exposure, gathering information through the skin itself rather than through direct vision. Such adaptations contribute to a predator that interacts with its surroundings in unusually subtle ways. Much of its behavior occurs beyond immediate observation. Much of its movement takes place within spaces that conceal rather than reveal. This has practical consequences for human encounters. Medical reports include cases in which swimmers, waders, and fishermen were bitten without ever clearly seeing the animal responsible. Sometimes the snake was unnoticed beforehand. Sometimes it vanished immediately afterward. In some instances, the victim never observed it at all. There is a profound difference between a threat that announces its presence and one that remains hidden within ordinary surroundings. Human attention naturally gravitates toward large, visible forms moving through open space. Sea snakes exist at the opposite end of that spectrum. They inhabit the same shallow waters, the same reefs, channels, and coastal margins, yet often pass through them unseen, their presence revealed only briefly, if it is revealed at all. Few animals carry a reputation as deeply rooted as that of the snake. Across centuries of observation, snakes were generally described as solitary creatures, moving through the world alone, hunting alone, and relying on instinctive behaviors shaped by ancient evolutionary programs. Even as scientific understanding expanded, reptiles remained largely outside discussions of complex social behavior. Intelligence, cooperation, and coordinated planning were traits more commonly associated with mammals, birds, and certain fish than with snakes. That assumption persisted for decades, resting comfortably within biological literature and public imagination alike. Then, along the reefs of southern Lombok in Indonesia, a series of observations began to complicate the picture. Beneath the surface, researchers watched Araboo sea crates move through reef systems in ways that did not fit traditional expectations. Individual snakes were not simply hunting in proximity to one another by coincidence. Instead, multiple animals appeared to participate in coordinated hunting events, moving through the same areas and interacting with the same opportunities in patterns that suggested something more organized than random overlap. The observations accumulated. By the time the findings were formally published during the year 2023 in scientific reports, researchers had documented 52 separate examples of communal hunting behavior. The consistency of the pattern made it difficult to dismiss as chance. Something unusual was occurring within these reef communities. What made the discovery even more remarkable was the identity of the other participants. The hunting groups did not consist solely of sea crates. Predatory fish, particularly groupers, repeatedly joined the activity. Two very different kinds of hunters were operating within the same dynamic system. The arrangement revealed a complementary relationship shaped by the structure of the reef itself. Groupers are powerful predators in open water, capable of pursuing prey through spaces where speed and maneuverability matter. Yet the narrow crevices and hidden cavities of a reef present limitations. Many prey species can disappear into spaces too small or complex for a grouper to access effectively. Sea crates possess the opposite advantage. Their elongated bodies allow them to probe deep into cracks, tunnels, and openings scattered throughout the reef framework. They can reach places unavailable to larger fish. Yet once prey escapes into open water, the balance shifts. A fast-moving fish may outrun the snake and vanish into the surrounding environment. Together, these limitations become strengths. A fish fleeing a probing sea crate may emerge directly into the path of a waiting grouper. A fish escaping a grouper's pursuit may retreat into shelter only to encounter a snake searching the same refuge. Escape routes narrow, opportunities disappear. The reef becomes a network of overlapping pressure points rather than a collection of separate hunting territories. Researchers observed encounters in which sea crates appeared to approach groupers before hunting activity intensified. These interactions suggested something beyond simple coexistence. While scientists remain cautious about interpreting animal behavior, the observations raised the possibility that sea crates were actively influencing the participation of their piscine partners. Movement patterns hinted at recruitment, coordination, or at minimum a shared understanding of the benefits created when both species hunted together. The implications extend beyond feeding success. Coordinated hunting requires animals to navigate information about the behavior of others. It involves timing, environmental awareness, and responses that adapt to changing circumstances. When those interactions occur between entirely different species, the cognitive demands become even more intriguing. For generations, reptiles were often portrayed as creatures governed almost exclusively by fixed behavioral rules. The communal hunting observations challenge that simplified view. They suggest that at least some sea snakes possess a degree of behavioral flexibility far richer than traditionally assumed. Rather than acting as isolated predators moving independently through their environment, they appear capable of participating in dynamic relationships that improve outcomes for multiple hunters at once. Within the quiet complexity of a reef, a sea crate and a grouper may become temporary partners, each exploiting abilities the other lacks. The result is a hunting system built not on strength alone, but on coordination, shared opportunity, and an ecological intelligence that remained hidden until careful observation finally brought it into view. There are moments in natural history when two stories run side by side for so long that they begin to feel inseparable from reality itself. One becomes familiar, repeated through films, headlines, documentaries, and public imagination. The other remains largely unseen, existing in scientific papers, regional medical reports, and the daily experiences of people living far from the centers that shape global narratives. Sharks and sea snakes occupy exactly such a divide. The great white shark has become one of the most recognizable animals on Earth. Its image appears in books, advertisements, television programs, and cinema. Entire generations inherited a vision of ocean danger built around its silhouette. Yet when examined through recorded mortality data, the numbers remain surprisingly small. Great white sharks are responsible for an average of roughly 5 to 8 human deaths worldwide in a typical year. The figure fluctuates, but it remains remarkably low considering the immense cultural influence attached to the species. Sea snakes exist on the opposite side of the equation. Their visibility in popular culture is minimal, yet estimates of annual envenomation range between 10,000 and 15,000 cases, with many researchers believing the true total may be substantially higher. The contrast is striking. One animal dominates public awareness while producing relatively few fatalities. The other generates thousands of medically significant encounters while remaining largely absent from mainstream discussions of ocean risk. Part of the difference lies in the nature of the encounter itself. Shark attacks are often investigatory events. A shark may bite, release, and retreat. The injury can be catastrophic because of the animal's size and dentition, but the damage is fundamentally mechanical. Teeth tear tissue, blood loss becomes the primary danger. Treatment focuses on trauma management, surgery, infection control, and supportive medical care. Sea snakes operate through an entirely different mechanism. Their most serious bites introduce venom, specifically evolved to disrupt biological systems. Neurotoxins interfere with communication between nerves and muscles. Myotoxins begin breaking down muscle tissue itself. The process unfolds internally, invisible at first, as molecular interactions spread through the body. A comparatively small bite can initiate physiological changes far beyond the visible wound. This distinction extends into treatment. No shark antivenom exists because sharks do not inject venom. Medical professionals address the physical consequences of injury rather than a circulating toxin. Sea snake envenomation presents a different challenge. Effective treatment often depends upon antivenom, specialized products designed to neutralize venom components before they inflict irreversible damage. Availability, however, remains uneven. Many of the regions where sea snake bites occur most frequently are coastal communities spread across South and Southeast Asia. Medical facilities may be distant, resources limited, and antivenom supplies inconsistent. In numerous cases, the nearest available option is tiger snake antivenom produced in Australia. While it can provide cross-reactive benefits against some sea snake venoms, it was not specifically developed for most species responsible for human envenomation. The contrast continues even within scientific research. Sharks rank among the most intensely studied marine animals on Earth. Dedicated research programs monitor populations, migration patterns, behavior, genetics, and conservation status. Satellite tags follow individual animals across oceans. Identification catalogs track known individuals. Long-term datasets stretch across decades. Sea snakes receive nothing comparable on a global scale. For many species, peer-reviewed literature repeatedly describes population information as patchy or incomplete. Basic questions regarding abundance, distribution, and long-term trends remain unresolved. In some regions, researchers simply do not know how many individuals exist or how populations are changing through time. When these comparisons are placed side by side, a curious pattern emerges. The animal occupying the center of public fear is visible, monitored, counted, and endlessly discussed. The animal responsible for vastly more medically significant encounters often remains hidden within gaps of data, infrastructure, and attention. The result is not merely a difference in reputation. It is a divergence between narrative and reality, one that has shaped how much of the world interprets danger beneath the surface of the sea. Among the many assumptions humans carry about predators, one of the most persistent is the belief that dangerous animals behave like simple triggers. A threat appears, a response follows, and the sequence unfolds automatically. Teeth, claws, venom, and force are often imagined as reflexive tools, deployed whenever circumstances provoke their use. Sea snakes complicate that picture in a subtle but important way. The venom discussed earlier is not a cheap resource. Every molecule must be manufactured by the body through processes that consume proteins, enzymes, nutrients, and energy. Maintaining venom glands requires ongoing biological investment. Replacing depleted venom requires additional investment. For an animal living in an environment where successful hunting can determine survival, waste carries consequences. Natural selection tends to reward efficiency wherever efficiency is possible. Across millions of years, venomous snakes did not simply evolve potent toxins, they also evolved ways of managing those toxins. The weapon became valuable not only because of what it could do, but because of when it was used. Sea snakes appear to exemplify this principle particularly well. During predatory encounters, venom delivery is often extensive. A fish escaping into open water may be lost forever. There is little room for hesitation. The biochemical response must be rapid, decisive, and effective enough to prevent immediate escape. Under those circumstances, conserving venom offers little advantage. Success depends upon deploying the weapon fully. A defensive encounter presents a completely different situation. A human is not prey. It cannot be swallowed, processed, or converted into nutrition. From the perspective of the snake, the interaction offers no obvious reward. The objective shifts from capture to avoidance. Evidence suggests that many sea snakes adjust their response accordingly. Some defensive bites inject reduced amounts of venom. Others deliver none at all. The physical act of biting remains the same, yet the biochemical outcome varies dramatically. The venom glands do not simply empty automatically because contact has occurred. This distinction is significant because it reveals a degree of behavioral flexibility operating beneath the surface of the encounter. The snake is responding not only to physical stimulation, but also to context. The same animal possesses the same weapon in both situations, yet the intensity of deployment changes according to circumstance. It is important not to mistake this for compassion or restraint in any human sense. No act of mercy is taking place. The mechanism appears rooted in economics rather than emotion. Venom is valuable. Hunting requires venom. Future survival may depend upon venom. Spending large quantities during an encounter that offers no nutritional benefit can be biologically costly. Conservation becomes advantageous. Seen from this perspective, a dry bite represents more than an absence of toxin. It represents a choice within a limited range of options. The snake assesses a situation and responds differently than it would during prey capture. The behavior reflects regulation rather than simple release. That observation becomes even more intriguing when viewed alongside the communal hunting behaviors documented in recent years. The image of a reptile operating entirely through fixed instinct becomes increasingly difficult to maintain. Cooperative hunting with groupers already suggests an ability to respond dynamically to environmental opportunities and the actions of other animals. Modulating venom delivery adds another layer to the picture. Neither behavior alone implies intelligence in the human sense, yet together they point toward a predator capable of more behavioral nuance than traditional stereotypes allow. The sea snake does not move through its environment as a biological machine, executing identical responses regardless of circumstance. Instead, its behavior appears shaped by ongoing assessments of cost, reward, opportunity, and necessity. The result is a predator whose most powerful weapon is not merely potent, but selectively deployed. Venom remains available, concentrated within the glands and refined by millions of years of evolution, yet its release is not guaranteed. Between possession and use exists a moment of biological evaluation. Within that moment lies a glimpse of a more complicated animal than science once assumed, one whose survival depends not simply on carrying an extraordinary weapon, but on knowing when that weapon is worth the cost of using. Rain falling onto the open ocean seems, at first glance, like a trivial event. A drop enters water, merges with water, and disappears. Across the vastness of a tropical sea, it is easy to imagine that a storm changes very little. Yet for many sea snakes, rainfall is not merely weather, it is a resource, one woven quietly into the biology of survival. The contradiction begins with an unexpected limitation. True sea snakes spend their entire lives surrounded by salt water. They hunt in it, travel through it, reproduce within it, and often never touch land. From a distance, they appear to have completed the transition from terrestrial reptile to fully marine animal. Yet deep within their physiology, traces of their ancestry remain. The kidneys inherited from long-vanished terrestrial ancestors are not perfectly suited to processing large volumes of seawater. Unlike many marine fish, which possess highly specialized systems for managing constant salt exposure, numerous sea snake species cannot simply drink the ocean surrounding them without consequence. The salt burden is too great. The chemistry remains imperfectly matched to the environment they inhabit. Evolution responded not by solving the problem completely, but by finding a workaround. When heavy rain falls over the ocean, something subtle happens at the surface. Fresh water is less dense than salt water, allowing it to form a temporary layer before mixing completely with the sea below. For a brief period, a delicate freshwater lens spreads across the surface. It may be only a few centimeters thick in places, invisible to casual observation and short-lived by nature, yet it is drinkable. Researchers have documented sea snakes rising to these freshwater layers during and after rainfall events. Rather than consuming seawater, they take advantage of these transient lenses, drinking from them before wind, waves, and mixing erase the opportunity. Across immense stretches of ocean, entire populations may depend upon this recurring cycle. The behavior reveals a relationship between animal and atmosphere that few marine predators share. A sea snake's access to drinking water is not determined solely by geography or prey availability. It is linked directly to rainfall patterns, seasonal weather systems, and the timing of storms moving across tropical seas. When rains arrive regularly, the system functions smoothly. Freshwater lenses form, hydration is maintained, and normal activity continues. During prolonged dry periods, however, the consequences become increasingly visible. Studies have shown that some sea snake populations experience measurable dehydration when rainfall remains absent for extended intervals. The effects are not merely internal. Behavior changes as water balance shifts. Activity levels can decline. Movements become less frequent. Foraging patterns alter. Individuals may spend more time near the surface, where opportunities for freshwater access are greatest when rain eventually returns. Entire coastal populations can exhibit synchronized responses to drought conditions, their biology reflecting weather patterns unfolding across hundreds of miles of ocean. This dependence creates an unusual image: a predator capable of crossing marine ecosystems, carrying venom of extraordinary potency and adaptations refined through millions of years, remains partially dependent upon something as delicate and temporary as rainwater resting on the sea. Survival can hinge upon a thin layer of fresh water that exists only briefly before dissolving back into the surrounding salt. The story also reveals something important about evolution itself. Adaptation is often imagined as a finished destination, a perfect matching of organism and environment. Reality is rarely so complete. Sea snakes are not examples of perfection. They are examples of transition. Their bodies contain innovations that allowed entry into the marine world, yet they also carry limitations inherited from a terrestrial past. The ocean transformed them profoundly, but not entirely. Beneath the elegance of their movement and the sophistication of their biology remain traces of an older design, reminders that evolutionary change proceeds through modification rather than replacement. In the case of many sea snakes, that history becomes visible each time clouds gather overhead and fresh rain settles briefly upon the sea, creating a fragile reservoir from which a fully marine reptile still needs to drink. A sea snake's tongue is rarely still. It slips outward, gathers information from the surrounding water, and disappears again with quiet regularity. To an observer, the movement appears familiar. Snakes have flicked their tongues for tens of millions of years, sampling chemical traces carried through the environment and translating invisible signals into usable information. Yet in sea snakes, that ancient behavior acquired an additional purpose, one hidden beneath the surface of the action itself. The challenge begins with salt. Life in the ocean means existing within a medium saturated with dissolved minerals. Every moment spent swimming exposes the body to concentrations far greater than those encountered by terrestrial ancestors. Left unmanaged, that salt gradually accumulates, disrupting the delicate chemical balance upon which cells, nerves, and organs depend. As earlier generations of sea snakes adapted to marine existence, their kidneys retained much of their inherited design. Evolution modified them, but not enough to fully solve the problem of living permanently in seawater. The result was a physiological gap, a mismatch between the demands of the environment and the capabilities of the organs responsible for regulating internal chemistry. Natural selection responded by constructing a different solution. Beneath the tongue of a sea snake lies a specialized structure known as the sublingual salt gland. Unlike the kidneys, which process a wide range of metabolic wastes, this gland focuses on a specific task. It extracts excess sodium chloride from the bloodstream and concentrates it for removal from the body. In effect, it functions as a dedicated desalination system, operating continuously as the animal moves through its marine world. The location of the gland is particularly elegant. Positioned beneath the tongue, it integrates directly into a behavior already central to snake biology. Each time the tongue flicks outward, chemical information enters. At the same time, concentrated salt leaves. The two processes occur together so seamlessly that they appear as a single action. A movement associated with sensory exploration becomes simultaneously a mechanism of physiological maintenance. The tongue gathers data from the environment while helping preserve the internal conditions necessary for survival within it. Seen in this light, the familiar tongue flick acquires a second meaning. The snake is not merely tasting the world around it, it is regulating the chemistry of its own body. Every outward movement carries traces of excess salt away from the bloodstream and into the surrounding water. This adaptation represents one of the clearest biological markers of the transition from land to sea. Terrestrial elapid relatives possess no comparable structure because they never faced the same challenge. Their environments did not require constant management of seawater-derived salt. The sublingual gland emerged only after generations of evolutionary pressure made such a system advantageous. Its existence offers a glimpse into the creative nature of adaptation. Evolution rarely discards entire organisms and begins again. Instead, it modifies what already exists, adding new structures where needed and integrating them into established behaviors. The result is often a patchwork of innovations layered atop older designs. Sea snakes embody this process with remarkable clarity. The salt gland is highly effective, yet it remains incomplete as a final answer. If it solved the problem perfectly, freshwater lenses formed by rainfall would no longer matter. The need for periodic access to fresh water would disappear. Instead, both systems persist together. The gland removes substantial quantities of salt, reducing physiological stress and making marine life possible. Rainwater continues to provide relief from the limitations that remain. This coexistence reveals an important truth about evolutionary change. Adaptation does not always produce perfection. Sometimes it produces adequacy, a solution sufficient for survival but not comprehensive enough to erase every inherited constraint. The sea snake continues to carry traces of its terrestrial past, even while thriving in an environment those ancestors could never have occupied. Beneath each flickering tongue lies evidence of that unfinished transformation. The gland quietly removes salt, the tongue samples the water, and an ancient reptile continues navigating a world its lineage entered millions of years ago, still refining the biological compromises that made the journey possible. Light changes as it travels. A beam crossing an open field is not the same beam that passes through a forest canopy, and neither resembles the light descending into the sea. The ocean transforms illumination with every meter of depth, filtering some wavelengths away, scattering others across suspended particles, and gradually reshaping the visual world into something fundamentally different from the one found on land. The earliest ancestors of sea snakes evolved beneath open skies. Their eyes developed within environments where sunlight moved through air, across vegetation, and over terrestrial landscapes. The visual pigments inside their retinas became tuned to those conditions, optimized for a world of horizons, shadows, and colors produced by life on land. When their descendants entered the ocean, that familiar environment vanished. Water does not transmit light in the same way air does. Reds disappear first, followed gradually by oranges and yellows. As depth increases, blue wavelengths dominate. Ultraviolet light behaves differently still, penetrating conditions that can leave other colors weakened or altered. The result is a visual landscape governed by rules entirely unlike those that shaped terrestrial vision. For an animal attempting to hunt, navigate, and survive, these changes present a challenge. Eyes adapted to one world become less effective in another. Evolution responded not through a single transformation, but through millions of years of gradual refinement. A study published during the year 2020 examined this process by analyzing opsin genes, the genetic instructions responsible for producing visual pigments. Conducted by researchers from the University of Plymouth, the work revealed that sea snakes experienced remarkable diversification in the visual systems inherited from their terrestrial ancestors. Rather than preserving the same pigment sensitivities found in land-dwelling relatives, sea snake lineages modified them. Across evolutionary time, their visual pigments shifted toward wavelengths more common in underwater environments. The retina gradually became attuned to the specific qualities of marine light, particularly the blue and ultraviolet portions of the spectrum that dominate many reef ecosystems. These changes were not uniform across all species. Different lineages followed different evolutionary paths depending upon habitat, depth, and ecological requirements. Some adaptations became especially pronounced in species that regularly occupy deeper reef environments where available light differs significantly from conditions near the surface. One lineage expanded its sensitivity to ultraviolet and blue wavelengths beyond anything documented among terrestrial relatives. This enhancement allowed useful vision at depths exceeding 80 meters, environments where surface-adapted visual systems would struggle to extract meaningful information. In those deeper waters, where sunlight arrives altered and diminished, the ability to detect specific wavelengths can determine whether prey remains visible or disappears entirely into the surrounding blue. The transformation becomes even more intriguing when compared with other marine vertebrates. Evolution does not always solve identical problems in identical ways. Dolphins and whales also returned to the sea after terrestrial ancestors abandoned it long ago, yet their visual journey followed a different trajectory. Research suggests that many marine mammals actually lost portions of their ancestral color sensitivity during adaptation to ocean life. Sea snakes moved in the opposite direction. Rather than reducing visual complexity, some lineages expanded it. New sensitivities emerged, existing pigments diversified. The marine environment encouraged the development of visual capabilities absent from closely related terrestrial species. This divergence illustrates the flexibility of evolution itself. The ocean presents challenges, but it does not prescribe a single solution. Different lineages can arrive at entirely different answers while adapting to the same broad environment. Mammals and reptiles entered the sea carrying different biological histories, and those histories influenced the paths available to them. After roughly 15 million years of marine life, sea snakes no longer perceive the ocean through eyes designed for terrestrial existence. Their visual systems have been reshaped by generations of exposure to underwater light, tuned gradually toward the wavelengths most relevant to survival beneath the surface. The result is more than an adjustment of color perception. It is the creation of a sensory experience unavailable to their ancestors. Across reefs, coastal waters, and deeper marine habitats, sea snakes move through a spectrum of information built specifically for the ocean, seeing patterns, contrasts, and signals carried by light that a land snake could never have fully perceived. Not all senses are confined to the head. In most animals, perception feels neatly organized. Eyes gather light, ears gather sound, noses gather scent. Information enters through specialized organs and travels inward toward the brain. The arrangement is so familiar that it often seems inevitable. Yet, evolution is under no obligation to follow familiar designs, particularly in an environment as demanding and unconventional as the ocean. Among the more unusual discoveries in sea snake biology is evidence suggesting that some species possess the ability to detect light through the skin of their tails. At first encounter, the idea sounds almost misplaced, as though a sensory system has appeared in the wrong location. Yet within the ecological realities of reef life, the adaptation begins to reveal its logic. A hunting sea snake often occupies two different spaces simultaneously. The head may be probing through open water or searching among reef structures for prey, while the rear portion of the body remains anchored elsewhere. In narrow crevices and complex coral formations, maintaining awareness of body position becomes important. Exposure can create vulnerability, particularly in environments crowded with predators and competitors. Researchers propose that specialized light-sensitive cells embedded within the tail skin may help solve this problem. When a tail remains concealed within a shaded crevice, the photoreceptors receive little or no light. If the tail becomes exposed, illumination changes. The animal gains information about its level of concealment without requiring direct visual confirmation. The remarkable aspect of this system is not merely what it detects, but how it detects it. This is not vision in the conventional sense. No images are formed. No detailed picture of the surrounding world appears within the brain. Instead, the skin itself acts as a sensor, registering environmental conditions independently of the eyes. Biologists refer to this phenomenon as dermal photoreception. Versions of it have been documented elsewhere in the animal kingdom, particularly among certain invertebrates whose bodies contain light-sensitive structures distributed across tissues rather than concentrated within a single visual organ. Its appearance in sea snakes suggests that sensory evolution followed a similarly creative path within these marine reptiles. The concept challenges a deeply rooted assumption about perception. Humans tend to imagine sensing as something centralized, gathered through a limited number of organs positioned at the front of the body. Dermal photoreception disperses that process. Information is collected across a broader physical landscape. The body itself becomes part of the sensory apparatus. For a sea snake moving through reefs, this arrangement offers practical advantages. Turning around repeatedly to inspect the position of the tail would be inefficient and potentially disruptive. Maintaining awareness through distributed sensory cells allows the animal to continue hunting while simultaneously monitoring another part of its body. The solution conserves time, movement, and attention. What makes the adaptation particularly fascinating is its apparent absence among terrestrial reptiles. Land environments simply did not exert the same pressures. The specific combination of narrow reef passages, concealed body positioning, and aquatic hunting behavior created a set of challenges unique to marine life. The resulting solution emerged only after millions of years within that environment. In this sense, the tail photoreceptors represent more than an isolated biological curiosity. They are evidence of how thoroughly the ocean reshaped the sensory architecture of these animals. Earlier sections revealed lungs altered for diving, skin adapted for gas exchange, glands evolved to manage salt, and visual systems retuned for underwater light. Dermal photoreception belongs within that same pattern of transformation. The sea snake did not merely enter the ocean and continue living as a terrestrial reptile beneath the surface. Its body became increasingly integrated with the logic of its new environment. Adaptations appeared where they were needed, even when those adaptations seemed unconventional by terrestrial standards. A tail capable of detecting light is one of those solutions. It exists because the ocean rewards awareness in forms that land rarely requires. Hidden among reefs and narrow passages, the body itself participates in perception, gathering information from the surrounding world in ways that would have been unimaginable to the ancestors that first slipped from shore into the sea millions of years ago. Scientific understanding often advances not through answers but through boundaries. For generations, sea snakes occupied a clearly defined space within marine biology. They were regarded as animals of coastal reefs, lagoons, estuaries, and relatively shallow waters. Their need to breathe atmospheric air seemed to impose obvious limits. However remarkable their adaptations became, there appeared to be a depth beyond which they simply could not go. That assumption remained largely unchallenged for much of recorded natural history. Observations consistently placed sea snakes within environments where access to the surface remained relatively easy. Their elongated lungs, air-breathing physiology, and dependence upon periodic surfacing appeared to support the same conclusion. The ocean belonged to them, but only a particular layer of it. Then evidence emerged that suggested the story was incomplete. In the year 2019, researchers published the first documented observations of sea snakes descending beyond 200 meters. The discovery extended far below the depth range traditionally associated with these reptiles and carried them into a region of the ocean often called the twilight zone. The name evokes fading light, and with good reason. By this depth, sunlight has been dramatically reduced. Colors disappear, visibility contracts. Illumination weakens into a dim blue haze before eventually approaching near darkness. Conditions become increasingly different from those experienced in the warm, bright shallows where sea snakes are most commonly encountered. Pressure changes as well. At approximately 200 meters, the surrounding water exerts roughly 20 times the pressure present at the surface. Every part of the animal experiences forces far greater than those encountered during ordinary dives. Water temperatures often decline significantly, creating an environment colder and more physically demanding than the tropical waters many species inhabit near shore. The discovery presented an immediate puzzle. Marine mammals, such as whales and seals, possess specialized adaptations for deep diving. Their bodies include mechanisms that help manage pressure, oxygen storage, and the physiological challenges associated with repeated descents. Sea snakes appear to possess no equivalent suite of obvious deep diving features. Their lungs are not known to collapse in the manner observed in many marine mammals, nor had researchers previously identified anatomical structures specifically associated with extreme depth tolerance. Yet the dives occurred. The current explanation centers on a combination of traits that, individually, seem modest but together may permit surprisingly deep excursions. Their bodies are extraordinarily flexible, allowing them to accommodate changing pressure conditions more effectively than rigid structures might permit. Their metabolism can slow during periods of reduced activity, lowering oxygen consumption and extending available dive time. The capacity for partial gas exchange through the skin may contribute additional physiological support during prolonged submersion. None of these mechanisms alone fully explains the observations. Together, however, they suggest a pathway through which sea snakes may reach depths once considered improbable. The purpose of these descents remains uncertain. Researchers suspect that food may provide the most likely explanation. Certain fish and eel species inhabit deeper environments during daylight hours, occupying layers of the ocean where predators from shallower habitats rarely venture. A sea snake capable of exploiting these resources gains access to prey that may face reduced competition from other hunters. The possibility is intriguing because it expands the ecological role of sea snakes beyond traditional expectations. Rather than remaining confined to a narrow slice of the marine environment, some species may be utilizing a much broader vertical range than previously recognized. The discovery also serves as a reminder of how incomplete scientific knowledge can remain, even for animals that have been studied for decades. Entire dimensions of behavior may persist unnoticed, simply because they occur beyond the places where humans most commonly observe them. A sea snake descending into darkness leaves behind the familiar habitats that shaped its public image and enters a realm few researchers expected it to occupy. In that sense, the dive record is more than a measurement of depth. It is evidence that the boundaries once drawn around these animals were never as fixed as they seemed, and that portions of their lives may still unfold far beyond the limits of ordinary observation. Every journey leaves behind a final thread connecting the traveler to where it began. For millions of years, that thread remained intact for countless marine animals. They could hunt in the sea, feed in the sea, and spend most of their lives beneath the surface. Yet eventually, they still had to return. Reproduction anchored them to the land from which their ancestors came. No matter how successful the transition appeared, the shoreline retained a claim upon them. Sea kraits still carry that inheritance. They move gracefully through marine environments and spend much of their lives in the water, yet reproduction pulls them back towards solid ground. Eggs must be laid in terrestrial locations. The next generation begins with a journey ashore. In that sense, the connection remains visible, a lingering reminder of an evolutionary story not yet fully completed. True sea snakes crossed a different threshold. At some point during their transformation into fully marine reptiles, reproduction itself entered the ocean. Instead of laying eggs on land, true sea snakes became viviparous. The developing young remain within the mother's body until birth, emerging directly into the sea as fully formed individuals. The beach disappears from the equation entirely. This change may seem simple at first glance, but its implications are profound. Once reproduction no longer requires land, an entire category of movement becomes unnecessary. No nesting beaches need to be located. No seasonal migrations toward shore become mandatory. No vulnerable period exists during which adults must leave their marine environment to complete the reproductive cycle. The ocean becomes sufficient unto itself. A true sea snake can spend its entire existence without ever touching land. It hunts in the sea, rests in the sea, mates in the sea, and gives birth in the sea. The environment that once served merely as habitat becomes the totality of experience. From first breath to final breath, every stage unfolds beneath the influence of tides, currents, and marine ecosystems. The young enter this world remarkably prepared. Average litter sizes commonly range from 2 to 9 offspring, though certain species have been documented producing much larger litters, sometimes exceeding 30 individuals in a single birth event. Regardless of number, the pattern remains consistent. The newborns arrive complete. There is no prolonged dependency. No parental instruction follows. No protected nursery period exists. Within moments of birth, each young snake possesses the equipment necessary for independent survival. Venom glands are already functional. Hunting instincts are already present. The body plan required for marine life has already been assembled. A newborn true sea snake enters the ocean not as a learner, but as a participant. This reproductive strategy represents one of the clearest indicators that the transition from land to sea reached an extraordinary level of completion. Earlier adaptations modified breathing, movement, vision, and physiology. Viviparity altered something even more fundamental. It removed the final practical requirement for terrestrial existence. Yet even this achievement carries consequences that shaped the geography of the lineage itself. The evolutionary transformation occurred within the Coral Triangle and surrounding regions of the Indo-Pacific. From there, Sea snakes expanded across vast stretches of tropical ocean. Their distribution became enormous, but it was not limitless. Landmasses still imposed barriers, not because the animals required beaches, but because their movement remained constrained by ecological pathways and suitable marine conditions. The Atlantic Ocean presents a striking example. Warm waters, abundant prey, and extensive tropical habitats appear suitable for sea snakes, yet native populations never established themselves there. Continents, currents, and historical geography combined to prevent most species from reaching that basin. The route simply never opened in a way that allowed widespread colonization. One notable exception pushed farther than the rest. The yellow-bellied sea snake extended its range across immense portions of the Pacific, eventually reaching coastlines along the Americas. Even this remarkable traveler, however, did not bridge the final gap into the Atlantic. The result is a curious outcome. A lineage evolved so completely for marine life that it no longer required land for any stage of existence. Yet its distribution remains shaped by the ancient arrangement of continents. Birth moved entirely into the ocean, but geography continued writing limits upon the map. Knowledge often creates the illusion of completeness. An animal appears in field guides, scientific papers, museum collections, and conservation databases, and it becomes easy to assume that its basic story is already known. Population size, geographic range, long-term trends, and ecological status seem like foundational facts that must surely exist somewhere within the scientific record. For sea snakes, that assumption quickly begins to unravel. Across much of their range, one of the simplest questions remains surprisingly difficult to answer. How many sea snakes are there? Not within a single reef, not within a single bay, across entire species. For many marine animals, such questions are approached through extensive monitoring programs. Researchers conduct repeated surveys, track migrations, estimate abundance, compare historical records, and build data sets that stretch across decades. Patterns emerge gradually, declines become visible, recoveries become measurable, population trends can be debated, refined, and improved through accumulating evidence. Sea snakes largely occupy a different reality. Among the more than 70 recognized species, basic population information is often sparse or absent. Scientific literature repeatedly describes available data as patchy, an understated term that conceals the scale of the uncertainty involved. In many cases, foundational questions regarding abundance, distribution, and long-term stability remain unresolved. Researchers know where some species occur. They know aspects of behavior and anatomy. Yet the broader picture frequently remains incomplete. The contrast with sharks is striking. Sharks are among the most intensively studied marine animals on Earth. Entire research institutions focus upon them. Satellite tags reveal migration routes across oceans. Identification databases track individual animals through unique markings and fin shapes. Monitoring programs conduct repeated surveys designed specifically to estimate population trends. Conservation assessments are supported by immense quantities of information gathered over decades. Sea snakes possess nothing comparable at a global scale. This absence of infrastructure creates unusual problems. Without reliable baseline measurements, change becomes difficult to detect. A population cannot be confidently described as declining if no one established how large it was in the first place. Stability becomes equally difficult to demonstrate. The result is a scientific landscape filled with uncertainty. One of the clearest examples emerged at Ashmore Reef, a remote marine reserve off the coast of Australia. Sea snakes were once abundant there, forming a visible component of the ecosystem. Over time, researchers realized that many of those populations had undergone dramatic reductions, yet the scale of the decline only became apparent retrospectively after the animals had already become scarce. Even today, the cause remains uncertain. Various explanations have been proposed, including shifts in prey availability, environmental changes, warming waters, and other ecological pressures. None has been established conclusively. The disappearance was observed, but the underlying mechanism remains elusive. Similar patterns have appeared elsewhere. Species described as relatively common in scientific accounts from the late 20th century have become noticeably harder to locate in areas where they were once regularly encountered. Whether these changes represent genuine declines, altered distributions, survey limitations, or some combination of factors is not always clear. The absence of baseline data transforms every observation into a puzzle. A missing population may indicate collapse. It may indicate migration. It may indicate that earlier estimates were incomplete. Without long-term monitoring, distinguishing among these possibilities becomes extraordinarily difficult. This uncertainty carries consequences beyond academic curiosity. Effective conservation depends upon information. Decisions about protection, habitat management, and ecological priorities require an understanding of what exists and how it changes through time. When that information is missing, even well-intentioned efforts become more complicated. Sea snakes have spent much of their evolutionary history hidden beneath the surface, moving through environments that receive far less attention than the charismatic animals that dominate marine narratives. In many ways, that invisibility extended into science itself. Researchers continue to discover new aspects of their behavior, physiology, and ecology, yet one of the most fundamental pieces of the story remains unresolved. For many species, science cannot confidently state whether populations are increasing, stable, or declining. It cannot provide a precise count. It cannot always define the boundaries of their distribution. The animals exist, often in remarkable abundance within specific places, yet the larger picture remains obscured. Beyond isolated surveys and scattered observations lies a vast expanse of unanswered data, and within that uncertainty, much of the global sea snake population remains effectively uncounted. Far from research vessels, university laboratories, and the institutions that produce most of the world's scientific literature, another relationship with sea snakes unfolds every day. It begins before sunrise, in coastal communities scattered across the shores of India, Sri Lanka, Myanmar, the Philippines, Vietnam, and Indonesia, where fishing remains both livelihood and inheritance. Nets descend into shallow water, traps are set among channels and reefs, and lines disappear beneath the surface. When the catch returns, it sometimes brings something unexpected with it. A sea snake rarely seeks out a fisherman. The encounter usually happens by accident. An animal moving through its normal hunting grounds becomes trapped in mesh, wrapped around a line, or confined inside a trap intended for fish. By the time it reaches the deck of a small boat, it is frightened, stressed, and struggling against restraint. Hands move toward the net moves toward the snake. In that narrow space between human necessity and animal defense, the conditions for envenomation are created. Medical literature repeatedly identifies the beaked sea snake as one of the most significant contributors to serious human envenomation. The reason is not extraordinary aggression. Rather, it is circumstance. The species inhabits many of the same coastal waters heavily used by fishermen, and when handled after accidental capture, it often responds defensively. The pattern appears again and again across case reports. not as dramatic encounters in open water, but as ordinary working accidents occurring during the daily routines of people earning a living from the sea. What follows depends less upon biology than geography. In major cities, a venomous bite may place a patient within reach of advanced medical care within a relatively short period of time. Along remote coastlines, the situation can be very different. Hours may separate a victim from the nearest clinic. Transportation may depend upon weather, fuel availability, or access to roads. Even after arrival, treatment is not guaranteed. Facilities serving isolated communities often operate with limited resources, and specialized antivenoms may not be available. The most commonly used treatment in many regions is antivenom originally developed in Australia for tiger snakes. Because of biochemical similarities among certain elapid venoms, it can provide cross-reactive protection against some sea snake envenomations. Yet it was not designed specifically for most sea snake species, and its effectiveness varies. It represents an important medical tool, but also a reminder of how limited the available options remain across much of the world where sea snake bites actually occur. Researchers attempting to understand the scale of the problem encounter another challenge. Official numbers exist, but they are surrounded by uncertainty. Published estimates of annual envenomations commonly begin around 10,000 cases and sometimes extend significantly higher. Nearly every discussion includes the same caution. Many incidents are never formally recorded. A fisherman treated locally may never enter a national database. A bite managed within a village may never appear in scientific literature. A death occurring far from reporting infrastructure may remain known only to family members and neighbors. Statistics emerge from incomplete records, scattered surveys, hospital admissions, and regional studies, leaving substantial portions of the picture obscured. This creates a striking contrast within modern natural history. Animals that capture global attention often attract research funding, conservation campaigns, documentaries, and continuous monitoring. Meanwhile, species that exert a direct influence on the lives of vulnerable coastal communities may remain comparatively overlooked. The imbalance is rarely intentional. It emerges from geography, economics, visibility, and access. For many fishermen, sea snakes are not symbols, mysteries, or subjects of scientific fascination. They are simply part of the working landscape of the sea, encountered unexpectedly among nets and catches, woven quietly into daily life. Their presence leaves traces in medical records, local knowledge, and personal experience, yet much of that story remains beyond the spotlight, carried along distant coastlines, where the world's attention seldom lingers for very long. A reef is often described through its visible inhabitants. Bright fish move through branching coral. Rays cross the sand. Sharks patrol the edges, where sunlight fades into deeper blue. Yet, beneath that familiar surface lies a network of relationships so intricate that the absence of a single predator can alter the behavior of dozens of other species. Sea snakes occupy one of those positions. They are rarely the animals that attract attention, but in many reef systems they are among the forces quietly holding the structure together. Unlike generalist predators that consume whatever prey happens to be available, many sea snakes evolved toward remarkable specialization. Their lives became intertwined with particular species, particular hunting strategies, and particular ecological roles. A sea snake drifting across a reef is not simply removing prey from the environment. It is regulating populations that influence countless other interactions below the surface. Burrowing eels, gobies, catfish, and other small reef inhabitants spend much of their lives hidden among crevices, sediment, and coral structure. Left entirely unchecked, some of these populations can expand beyond the balance maintained by predators. Sea snakes occupy a unique position because they can pursue prey into places that many larger hunters cannot reach. Their slender bodies allow them to explore tunnels, cavities, and narrow spaces woven throughout the reef itself. In doing so, they exert pressure on species that might otherwise become disproportionately abundant. This role becomes even more striking in species with highly restricted diets. The turtle-headed sea snake, for example, feeds almost exclusively on fish eggs. Such a diet may seem narrow, even limiting, yet it places the animal in direct contact with one of the reef's most important biological resources. Fish eggs represent future generations, stored energy, and population growth all at once. By consuming them selectively, the snake becomes a regulator of reproduction, influencing which species thrive and which remain in balance with the surrounding community. Other species display equally precise relationships. Hydrophis major focuses almost entirely on striped eel catfish. The connection is so specialized that predator and prey become linked across evolutionary time. Where one exists, the other often follows. The presence of a predator dedicated to a single prey species prevents population growth from proceeding without constraint. Ecological stability frequently emerges from exactly these kinds of relationships, narrow connections that seem insignificant until they disappear. Evidence of this complexity emerged at Ashmore Reef, where sea snake populations declined dramatically. Researchers examining the broader ecosystem found that the reef did not simply continue along the same trajectory after their disappearance. Changes rippled through fish communities, altering patterns that had previously been maintained through long-established predator-prey interactions. The reef remained alive, but it was no longer functioning in precisely the same way. The absence of sea snakes created space for ecological adjustments that extended far beyond the animals themselves. Their influence also moves in the opposite direction, through the food web. Sea snakes are hunters, yet they are also prey. Sea eagles take them from the surface. Large groupers consume them when opportunities arise. Certain shark species include them in their diets. Removing sea snakes therefore affects not only the species they control, but also the predators that depend upon them as a source of energy. Ecological connections rarely move in a single direction. They spread outward like threads woven through a living tapestry. For this reason, some researchers have described sea snakes as harbingers of ecosystem health. Their presence often reflects reefs that remain productive, interconnected, and biologically functional. Their absence can signal disruptions that extend beyond a single species. This is perhaps the quiet irony of their story. An animal largely overlooked in popular discussions of the ocean carries a weight far greater than its visibility suggests. Within reef ecosystems that support roughly a quarter of all marine species, sea snakes are not peripheral actors. They are part of the architecture itself, helping maintain balances that countless other forms of life depend upon every day. On a map of the world's oceans, the absence is almost invisible. Vast stretches of tropical water fill the Atlantic basin. Coral reefs flourish across the Caribbean. Mangrove forests fringe coastlines. Fish communities occupy nearly every ecological niche expected of warm marine ecosystems. To a biologist examining habitat alone, the region appears remarkably welcoming. Yet across all of that water, from the Caribbean Sea to the tropical Atlantic, one group of animals is missing entirely. There are no native sea snakes. The emptiness is striking, not because the environment seems hostile, but because it seems ideal. Warm temperatures, abundant prey, Shallow reefs, sheltered coastlines, and complex marine food webs are all present. Much of the Atlantic appears capable of supporting sea snakes as successfully as the Indo-Pacific. The puzzle is not why they failed there. The puzzle is why they never arrived. The answer begins long before reefs, coastlines, and modern oceans took their present form. It reaches back to the place where sea snakes first began their transformation from terrestrial reptiles into marine predators. That transition unfolded within the Coral Triangle, a vast region of extraordinary biodiversity stretching through what is now Southeast Asia. There, over millions of years, ancestral snakes entered coastal waters and gradually adapted to a life increasingly tied to the sea. Once established, their descendants expanded across enormous portions of the Indian and Pacific Oceans. Ocean currents carried them. Suitable habitats welcomed them. Evolution refined them. Yet, every expansion remained constrained by geography, and geography can be as powerful a force as natural selection itself. To the east stood the American continents, forming an immense wall of land between the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans. To the west stood Africa, another barrier, separating populations from routes that might otherwise have connected ocean basins. Unlike fish capable of crossing deeper offshore pathways, sea snakes remained closely associated with warm marine corridors and coastal environments. Their movement depended upon routes that geography simply did not provide. One potential pathway existed around the southern tip of Africa. On paper, it appears straightforward. In reality, it presents a challenge shaped by temperature rather than distance. Waters surrounding the Cape of Good Hope become dramatically colder than those inhabited by most sea snake species. For animals adapted to warm tropical seas, this region functions less like a corridor and more like a wall made of climate. Individuals attempting to move northward through these conditions encounter an environment far outside the thermal range that supported their evolution. The yellow-bellied sea snake demonstrates how powerful ocean currents can be when conditions align. Drifting across immense distances, it achieved one of the broadest distributions of any reptile on Earth. Carried by equatorial circulation patterns, it reached Pacific waters along the western coasts of the Americas and established itself across an extraordinary range. Yet even this highly successful traveler never crossed into the Atlantic. The barriers surrounding that ocean remained intact. What makes the absence especially remarkable is that no obvious ecological replacement occupies the same role. Caribbean reefs contain predators, certainly, but no marine reptile lineage evolved into the niche filled elsewhere by sea snakes. Burrowing fish, reef channels, and coastal hunting grounds exist exactly where such animals might be expected to thrive. The opportunity appears present. History simply prevented it from being taken. In this way, the distribution of life across the oceans is not determined solely by adaptation or biological capability. Chance also leaves its fingerprints. Ancient continental arrangements, shifting climates, and the timing of evolutionary events create boundaries that endure for millions of years. The Atlantic is not empty of sea snakes because it rejected them. It is empty because geography intervened long before they arrived. Across half the world's tropical ocean, an entire lineage remains absent, not through failure, but through a sequence of accidents written into the shape of the planet itself. Most encounters with wild animals leave some kind of record: a footprint in mud, a photograph, a sighting report, a memory clear enough to be described afterward. Sea snakes, often leave none of these things. They move through environments where visibility is limited, attention is divided, and identification happens in fractions of a second. By the time a person realizes they have seen something unusual, the animal is frequently gone. This creates a peculiar problem. Before scientists can count encounters, people must first recognize that an encounter occurred. In the shallow coastal waters of the Indo-Pacific, countless shapes drift through the field of view. Strands of seagrass sway with the current. Eels emerge from burrows and vanish again. Fragments of debris move across the surface. Light scatters through suspended sediment, softening outlines and reducing contrast. Within that visual complexity, a sea snake rarely appears as the distinct animal shown in field guides or documentaries. More often, it appears as a brief suggestion of movement, a narrow silhouette, or a patterned shape slipping between patches of shadow. Many species possess alternating dark and pale bands that break apart the outline of the body. In clear water, those patterns can be striking. In murky water, they serve a different purpose. The body becomes visually fragmented, difficult to follow, and surprisingly easy to mistake for something else. A swimmer glimpsing only part of the animal may interpret it as an eel. Another may dismiss it as floating vegetation. Someone standing in waist-deep water may not register it at all. The ocean is filled with objects that resemble other objects. Human perception evolved to simplify overwhelming environments by making rapid assumptions. Most of the time, those assumptions are useful. They allow the brain to process large amounts of information without becoming overloaded, yet they also create blind spots. A shape that does not immediately appear important is often categorized and forgotten before conscious attention ever settles upon it. Sea snakes seem particularly well positioned to exploit this tendency, not through intention, but through the way their bodies interact with their surroundings. They are slender, where sharks are broad. They create little disturbance in the water. Their movements are fluid rather than abrupt. Even when visible, they rarely command attention in the way larger marine animals do. This may help explain a curious pattern found throughout coastal regions where sea snakes are common. People frequently describe sensations rather than sightings. Someone recalls feeling an object brush against a leg while wading through shallow water. Another remembers a brief contact while swimming above a reef. The encounter ends without injury, without alarm, and without certainty regarding what caused it. The memory remains, but the identity of the animal does not. Because sea snakes are generally non-aggressive during open water encounters, most of these moments pass without consequence. The animal continues on its way. The swimmer continues on theirs. No report is filed. No database entry is created. No scientist receives information that the encounter ever occurred. Over time, this creates a subtle distortion in our understanding of their presence. Recorded encounters reflect only the situations in which identification was successful or circumstances forced closer observation. The far larger category of unnoticed proximity remains largely invisible. What cannot be recognized cannot easily be counted. The result is a gap extending through much of the available data. Researchers can estimate distributions, model habitat use, and document confirmed observations. Yet the true frequency with which humans and sea snakes occupy the same water at the same moment remains uncertain. Published numbers provide a glimpse rather than a complete picture. In that sense, the misidentification problem is not merely a matter of mistaken identity. It shapes how the animal exists within human awareness itself. Sea snakes are often present without being acknowledged, encountered without being recognized, and remembered only as a fleeting movement beneath the surface. The ocean records those meetings faithfully. Human perception often does not. Long before anyone measured venom potency, tracked envenomation statistics, or mapped the distribution of marine predators, human beings were already deciding what looked dangerous. Those judgments emerged from millions of years, spent navigating landscapes filled with predators whose intentions could often be understood at a glance. Large bodies, sudden movement, forward motion, exposed weapons, these became signals worth noticing. The modern world inherited those instincts, and the ocean inherited the stories built upon them. When the film Jaws arrived in 1975, it did more than tell a story about a shark. It connected an ancient pattern of fear to a modern cultural symbol. Within a remarkably short period, the great white shark became something larger than an animal. It became the visual shorthand for ocean danger itself. News reports, television specials, books, posters, and public imagination reinforced the same image again and again. A powerful predator rising from below fit perfectly into instincts already shaped long before the first human ever saw the sea. The consequences extended far beyond cinema. Coastal tourism shifted, shark culling programs expanded, public attitudes hardened. Entire generations grew up carrying the same mental picture whenever they imagined danger in open water. Few wild animals have ever received such concentrated narrative attention. Sea snakes experienced none of it. There was no defining film, no globally shared television moment, no cultural event that fixed their image inside public consciousness. They remained largely absent from the stories people told about the ocean. Their existence persisted mostly in scientific literature, regional knowledge, and occasional encounters, far from the places where popular narratives were created. Part of this difference emerges from the animals themselves. Sharks are visually dramatic. Even at a distance, their form communicates purpose. A streamlined body moves through water with obvious intent. Size amplifies presence. Speed amplifies attention. The silhouette alone is enough to command notice. Human perception recognizes the pattern almost immediately. Sea snakes present a very different picture. They drift rather than charge. They weave rather than surge. Their bodies are narrow, flexible, and understated. Nothing about their movement resembles the kind of pursuit that instinctive threat detection evolved to recognize. Even their most dangerous feature remains hidden. Venom does not announce itself visually. It resides inside glands, invisible to the observer, carried quietly beneath scales that often appear delicate rather than imposing. This distinction reveals something important about the architecture of fear itself. Human beings do not evaluate danger solely through objective risk. The mind relies heavily upon visual and behavioral cues. Fast movement captures attention. Large size commands awareness. Direct approaches trigger caution. These responses were shaped across evolutionary timescales by encounters with predators whose threat could be interpreted through motion and form. A thin animal moving slowly through reef water activates very few of those ancient alarms. The brain categorizes it differently. It appears manageable, peripheral, or unimportant. The assessment occurs automatically, long before conscious reasoning enters the process. Meanwhile, a much larger animal crossing open water can generate a profound response, even when actual risk remains extremely low. The image aligns with expectations inherited from deep evolutionary history. The shape fits the template. What emerges from this contrast is not a failure of human perception, but a reminder of its origins. Our instincts evolved to solve problems faced by distant ancestors, not necessarily to evaluate every danger found in a modern understanding of nature. They remain powerful, useful, and occasionally misleading. Sea snakes occupy that gap between perception and reality. Their danger is largely biochemical rather than mechanical. Their presence is often subtle rather than dramatic. They do not conform to the visual language traditionally associated with predators. As a result, they remain largely absent from the emotional geography people construct when imagining the ocean. The story of sharks and sea snakes is therefore not only a story about animals, it is also a story about attention. One became a symbol because it matched the shape of fear already waiting in the human mind. The other slipped quietly past those same instincts, carrying extraordinary capabilities while remaining largely outside the narratives that determine what people notice, remember, and worry about when they look toward the sea. Far from shore, beyond reef edges and continental shelves, there are places where the ocean offers almost nothing that resembles a habitat. No coral architecture rises from below. No mangrove roots descend from above. No rocky coastline interrupts the horizon. There is only water, sky, current, and distance. Most sea snakes never enter this world. Their lives remain tied to reefs, estuaries, lagoons, and coastal systems. Yet one species crossed an ecological boundary so completely that it seems almost detached from the history that produced it. The yellow-bellied sea snake is, in many ways, the culmination of a journey that began millions of years earlier among the crowded coastal ecosystems of Southeast Asia. While its relatives remained connected to fixed places, this species followed a different path. It abandoned the idea of place altogether. Its world is not a reef or shoreline. Its world is movement. Rather than establishing territories around permanent structures, it drifts along equatorial current systems that circle vast portions of the Pacific and Indian Oceans. Oceanographic forces become roads, carrying the animals across distances that would be impossible through active swimming alone. Current convergence zones gather floating debris, fragments of vegetation, and drifting material into long ribbons across the sea surface. Small fish seek shelter beneath these temporary islands. The snakes follow. In these wandering habitats, food appears and disappears according to the shifting geometry of water itself. The predator survives not by defending a location, but by remaining inside a moving landscape that never stays the same for long. Entire populations can travel immense distances without ever encountering anything that resembles a coastline. Sometimes the snakes gather in astonishing numbers. Observers have documented aggregations containing thousands of individuals stretched along current lines. From above, they appear as scattered marks upon the sea. Beneath the surface, they form part of a floating ecosystem assembled entirely by ocean circulation. This existence presents challenges unlike those faced by any reef-dwelling relative. Earlier in this story, freshwater lenses drifting atop seawater emerged as a crucial resource for many sea snake species. Rainfall briefly creates a thin layer of drinkable water before mixing with the ocean below. For coastal populations, these opportunities occur with some regularity. For an animal spending months in the open ocean, the situation becomes far more mysterious. Researchers still do not fully understand how yellow-bellied sea snakes manage their salt balance during prolonged journeys far from predictable freshwater sources. Their physiology clearly functions well enough to sustain an extraordinarily successful species, yet important pieces of the mechanism remain unresolved. Even now, after decades of study, the open ocean continues to conceal some of its answers. Their bodies reveal the cost of specialization. The paddle-shaped tail that serves them so effectively at the surface has little value on land. A stranded yellow-bellied sea snake is almost helpless. Unlike many coastal relatives, it cannot simply crawl back toward safety. The transformation that granted mastery of one environment removed competence in another. And yet that specialization has carried the species across remarkable distances. Individuals have been recorded near New Zealand, throughout Hawaiian waters, and along portions of the California coastline. These observations surprised researchers because some locations lie beyond the thermal conditions traditionally associated with tropical sea snakes. Ocean currents once again provide part of the explanation, transporting animals into regions that seem, at first glance, outside their expected range. Seen from a broader perspective, the yellow-bellied sea snake represents the furthest extension of a process that began roughly 15 million years ago. Ancestral land snakes entered shallow marine environments and slowly surrendered one terrestrial trait after another. Over immense spans of time, the ocean reshaped their bodies, senses, behavior, and biology. Most species stopped somewhere along that path. The yellow-bellied sea snake did not. It continued beyond reefs, beyond coastlines, beyond fixed habitats, until the currents themselves became home. In doing so, it reached a form of existence unlike that of any other reptile, a life carried across the surface of an entire ocean, sustained by motion, shaped by water, and defined not by where it lives, but by the endless movement through which it lives at all. The transformation was always visible on the outside. It could be seen in the paddle tail, in the elongated lung, in the strange relationship between skin and seawater, and in the countless anatomical compromises that accumulated across millions of years. Yet every visible adaptation began somewhere deeper. Beneath scales, organs, and behavior lay another record of the journey, written not in flesh but in genetic code. Only recently has science gained the tools necessary to read that record with any real precision. The genomic studies published during the early years of this decade provided the clearest view yet of what happened after a lineage of terrestrial snakes entered the sea. Researchers comparing sea snake genomes with those of their land-dwelling relatives found evidence that the transition was not merely a matter of existing traits being repurposed. The ocean appears to have driven extensive biological rewriting at the molecular level. In many ways, the findings echoed themes already encountered throughout this story. Again and again, the evidence pointed toward systems becoming specialized for a world fundamentally different from the one their ancestors inhabited. Among the most striking discoveries involved a collection of genes known as the V2R family. These genes participate in chemical sensing, the biological machinery underlying the remarkable tongue-flicking behavior that snakes use to sample their surroundings. For a terrestrial animal, chemical information behaves in relatively predictable ways. Air currents carry scent trails through a landscape structured by gravity, vegetation, soil, and obstacles. The ocean operates under different rules. Chemical signals disperse through a three-dimensional environment where currents twist, fold, and transport information across complex pathways. In true sea snakes, the V2R gene family expanded dramatically compared with terrestrial relatives. The change suggests an increased capacity for interpreting chemical information in water, allowing the animals to navigate a sensory world far more fluid and diffuse than anything experienced by their ancestors. The finding gains additional significance when viewed alongside the evolution of the sublingual salt gland. Earlier, that organ emerged as one of the clearest physiological markers of marine adaptation. Now the genetic evidence hints that the tongue itself may have become part of a broader sensory transformation, one that intertwined environmental perception with the practical demands of surviving in salt water. The story repeats within the venom system. Researchers identified patterns of directional selection acting on venom-associated genes. In evolutionary biology, directional selection indicates that specific traits are being actively favored rather than simply drifting through chance. The implication is important. The extraordinary potency of sea snake venom was not merely inherited from ancestral elapids and preserved unchanged. Ocean conditions appear to have exerted continuous pressure, favoring toxins that acted faster, more efficiently, and with greater reliability against aquatic prey. The same pattern emerges within genes associated with skin function. Earlier sections explored how sea snakes partially solved the challenge of underwater respiration through cutaneous gas exchange. Genomic analysis revealed modification signatures consistent with adaptation in pathways connected to skin permeability. The oxygen entering through the skin is not simply the result of fortunate anatomy. It reflects changes embedded within the biological instructions responsible for building and maintaining that anatomy. Taken together, the evidence forms a portrait that is remarkably coherent. Chemical sensing changed, venom systems changed, physiological tolerance changed, respiratory functions changed. The modifications appear across multiple biological layers, reinforcing one another like pieces of a single narrative preserved inside DNA. What emerges from these studies is not the image of a land snake carrying old genetic machinery into a new environment and somehow managing to survive. Instead, the genome itself bears the marks of the transition. Entire sections of biological instruction were altered as natural selection accumulated solution after solution across immense spans of time. The result is a creature whose history remains preserved in every cell. Deep within the chromosomes lies the record of an ancient crossing, a long conversation between inheritance and environment. The ocean did not merely shape the descendants of those early snakes. It reached into the architecture of life itself, editing, refining, and rewriting until the genetic document that emerged could support an existence their terrestrial ancestors would never have recognized. The absence of knowledge leaves a different kind of footprint than the presence of knowledge. It is not marked by certainty, charts, or long rows of measurements. Instead, it appears as blank spaces on maps, unanswered observations in field notes, and scientific papers filled with cautious language. As the story of sea snakes has unfolded, a recurring pattern has emerged. Again and again, researchers encounter the limits of what is known, not because the animals are unimportant, but because so little attention was directed toward them for so long. Conservation, at its core, depends upon information. Before a species can be protected, scientists must understand where it lives, how many individuals exist, how quickly it reproduces, what habitats it depends upon, and how those populations change through time. These are the foundations upon which nearly every successful conservation effort is built. For sea snakes, those foundations are often missing. Across much of their range, even basic population estimates remain unavailable. Many species inhabit remote reef systems, complex coastal environments, or regions where long-term ecological monitoring is limited. As a result, scientists frequently lack the baseline information necessary to determine whether a population is healthy, declining, or already in trouble. This uncertainty became strikingly apparent at Ashmore Reef. Earlier, the reef appeared as a place where sea snakes once thrived in remarkable abundance. Yet when researchers began comparing historical observations with modern surveys, an unsettling pattern emerged. Species that had once been common became difficult to find. Entire communities seemed diminished. Some disappeared almost completely from locations where they had previously been a routine part of the ecosystem. What makes the event especially troubling is that it was recognized largely in retrospect. There was no moment when alarms sounded and emergency measures began. The decline became visible only after enough time had passed for comparisons to reveal what had already been lost. The reasons remain uncertain. Researchers have proposed several possibilities. Changes in prey availability may have altered the ecological balance that sustained local populations. Rising water temperatures associated with climatic shifts may have placed physiological stress upon species adapted to narrow environmental conditions. Ocean chemistry may have changed in subtle but important ways. Fishing activity may have introduced pressures difficult to detect through conventional surveys. Each explanation carries some plausibility. None has been definitively confirmed. The uncertainty extends beyond a single reef. Throughout scientific literature from the late 20th century, various species were described as common or locally abundant in particular regions. In some cases, more recent surveys have struggled to locate those same animals with comparable frequency. Yet, without historical population counts of sufficient quality, determining the scale of change becomes extraordinarily difficult. This is where conservation enters a paradoxical state. A declining species can be protected when evidence demonstrates decline. A stable species can be managed when evidence demonstrates stability. But when evidence itself is missing, decision-making becomes far more complicated. Scientists are forced to work with fragments, assembling tentative pictures from scattered observations collected across vast geographic ranges. The challenge is reflected in the assessments of many sea snake species. Numerous entries remain classified as data deficient, a designation that sounds technical but carries a simple meaning. There is not enough information to determine their conservation status with confidence. In practical terms, this means uncertainty occupies the space where knowledge should be. Perhaps many sea snake populations remain secure across their range. Perhaps the apparent declines observed in some regions reflect localized fluctuations rather than broader trends. Those possibilities remain open. Yet equally plausible is the possibility that significant changes are unfolding beyond the limits of existing monitoring efforts. The difficulty lies in the fact that both interpretations can coexist within the current evidence. By the time a disappearing animal becomes obvious, much of the story may already be over. For sea snakes, the central challenge is not merely protecting what exists. It is learning enough about these elusive inhabitants of the ocean to recognize change while there is still time to understand it. In many parts of their world, conservation begins not with intervention, but with the quieter task of finally seeing what has been there all along. Long before scientific journals, conservation assessments, genome sequencing, and satellite tracking, people built stories to explain the living world around them. Some animals entered those stories easily. They were large enough to see from a distance, dramatic enough to command attention, and visible enough to become symbols. Others remained at the edges, present but overlooked, moving through ecosystems with little acknowledgement beyond the communities that encountered them directly. The ocean inherited this imbalance. Across the course of this journey, sharks have appeared repeatedly, not because they are unimportant, but because they occupy such a large space within the human imagination. They are genuine apex predators, ancient animals shaped by hundreds of millions of years of evolution. Their ecological role is real. Their influence on marine food webs is real. Nothing in the story of sea snakes diminishes that reality. Yet the ocean itself has always been larger than the stories constructed around any single species. Over time, an architecture of fear emerged around sharks. Part of it came from highly publicized encounters. Part came from the natural tendency of the human mind to notice large moving shapes in open water. Part came from cultural narratives that transformed a complex animal into a symbol recognized around the world. The result was a framework through which generations learned to interpret marine danger. Like all frameworks, it illuminated some things while obscuring others. While public attention focused on obvious predators, countless quieter organisms continued their lives beyond the spotlight. Some carried extraordinary venom. Some shaped ecosystems in ways only recently understood. Some evolved biological solutions unlike anything found elsewhere in nature. Yet because they lacked the visual characteristics that human attention naturally gravitates toward, they remained largely absent from popular understanding. Sea snakes belong to that overlooked category. Their danger does not announce itself through size. It does not arrive with explosive movement or dramatic displays. It resides within systems that are subtle, biochemical, and largely invisible. A venom gland, no larger than a thumbnail, can contain toxins refined through millions of years of evolutionary pressure. A slow drifting body can conceal physiological adaptations that challenge assumptions about what reptiles are capable of becoming. A species ignored by popular culture can turn out to be woven deeply into the ecological fabric of entire reef systems. The lesson extends beyond sea snakes themselves. Again and again, the ocean reveals that significance and visibility are not the same thing. Some of the most important relationships occur beneath the threshold of casual observation. Entire ecosystems depend upon species that rarely appear in documentaries, news headlines, or public debate. Biological innovation often unfolds far from the creatures that attract the most attention. Humans have shared coastal waters with sea snakes for thousands of years across the Indo-Pacific. Generations of fishermen, divers, and coastal communities encountered them as part of ordinary life. They moved through reefs, estuaries, lagoons, and shorelines, while much of the broader world remained largely unaware of their existence. The relationship endured, whether it was recorded or not. That quiet coexistence carries its own significance. Scientific literature is often treated as a catalog of reality, yet reality always extends beyond the boundaries of what has been documented. Entire populations can remain poorly understood. Ecological roles can go unnoticed. Evolutionary stories can remain hidden until new tools finally reveal them. Throughout this narrative, sea snakes have repeatedly occupied that space between presence and recognition. Perhaps that is the broader message carried by their story. The ocean is not dangerous only in ways that are obvious. It is not complex only where complexity is expected. It does not reserve its most remarkable adaptations for the animals that dominate headlines or shape popular imagination. Often its deepest lessons emerge from organisms that spend centuries beyond the center of attention, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see what was there all along. In that sense, the story of sea snakes is not merely about venom, evolution, or survival. It is also about perception and the enduring gap between what the natural world contains and what humans choose to notice. Evolution is often imagined as a completed journey, a procession of creatures arriving at their final form and remaining there until extinction or replacement. Yet the natural world rarely operates with such clean endings. Every living species occupies a moment within a longer story, carrying traces of the past while moving, often invisibly, toward futures that have not yet arrived. Among the countless animals inhabiting the oceans today, few embody that unfinished state more clearly than sea snakes. Throughout this journey, they have appeared again and again as creatures balanced between inheritances. Their bodies reveal solutions to marine life that are both ingenious and incomplete. Their physiology carries evidence of adaptation, but also reminders of origins that remain surprisingly close beneath the surface. One of the clearest examples drifts upon the ocean itself whenever rain begins to fall. Earlier, the strange dependence on freshwater lenses revealed a contradiction at the heart of many sea snake species. They live surrounded by seawater, yet cannot rely upon it as a primary source of hydration. Instead, they often depend upon temporary layers of rainwater floating atop the ocean's surface. It is a solution that works, but it is also a reminder that evolution rarely proceeds in straight lines. If the pressures that shape sea snakes continue across immense stretches of time, several possibilities emerge. Future lineages may develop increasingly efficient mechanisms for processing salt, reducing or eliminating dependence upon rainfall. Alternatively, species that remain tied to freshwater access may find their distribution constrained by changing precipitation patterns. The outcome remains unwritten, suspended somewhere beyond the horizon of present observation. The sea crates illustrate a different branch of the same unfinished narrative. Unlike true sea snakes, they still return to land to reproduce. Their connection to beaches and coastal nesting sites preserves a biological relationship that other lineages abandoned long ago. Yet that dependence introduces vulnerabilities unique to their way of life. Coastlines are among the most heavily altered environments on Earth. Human development expands toward shorelines. Tourism concentrates activity in precisely the places many marine animals require for reproduction. Rising seas gradually reshape beaches that have existed for thousands of years. For sea crates, the persistence of land dependence means the future of their evolutionary pathway remains linked to landscapes undergoing rapid transformation. Elsewhere, new possibilities seem to be emerging. The deep diving observations discussed earlier suggested that at least some sea snakes may be exploring ecological territory beyond what researchers once believed possible. Descents into the twilight zone hint at access to prey communities that historically existed outside the reach of most marine reptiles. If such behavior proves more widespread than currently documented, it may represent the earliest visible stages of another adaptive expansion. The pattern would not be unprecedented. Roughly 15 million years ago, ancestral elapids entered shallow coastal waters and began a transition that ultimately produced animals capable of spending their entire lives at sea. Over that span of time, lungs changed, senses changed, reproductive strategies changed, and genomes changed. The result was one of the most extraordinary marine radiations among reptiles. Had those processes continued under relatively stable conditions, future trajectories might have included even greater integration with open ocean environments, increasingly complete physiological adaptation to marine existence, and perhaps expansion into regions currently inaccessible due to geographic or environmental barriers. Yet, evolution does not occur in isolation from circumstance. The forces acting upon sea snakes today differ from those that shaped them across the preceding millions of years. Habitat degradation alters the environments through which adaptation unfolds. Climate change modifies temperature regimes and rainfall patterns. Shifts in prey availability ripple through ecological networks. Human activity introduces pressures that operate on timescales far faster than most evolutionary responses. Seen from this perspective, the stakes extend beyond the survival of individual species. What exists within sea snakes is not merely a collection of modern animals. It is an evolutionary process still unfolding, a story whose ending has not yet been written. Their bodies remain records of transformation and progress, carrying forward momentum accumulated across millions of years, moving toward possibilities that can only emerge if the journey itself is allowed to continue. Long before any human charted a coastline, named a reef, or imagined monsters beneath the waves, the ocean was already busy, composing lives stranger than anything that would later appear in stories. It shaped bodies in silence, refined instincts across immense spans of time, and produced creatures whose existence never depended on being noticed. The sea snakes drifting through warm coastal waters today belong to that older reality. They are not characters from folklore or inventions of modern science. They are the outcome of a transformation that began roughly 15 million years ago, when a lineage of land-dwelling predators entered the sea and started becoming something entirely new. Since then, generation after generation has carried that transition forward, not in sudden leaps but through countless small adjustments, each one preserved because it worked within the peculiar logic of the ocean. By now, the familiar image of ocean danger appears almost incomplete. Popular imagination tends to populate the water with large silhouettes, visible hunters, animals whose presence can be recognized from a distance. Yet the living world is rarely organized around human expectations. Some of its most remarkable predators move without spectacle. They travel through tidal channels, reef flats, mangrove edges, and coastal shallows with little disturbance. Their bodies are slender, their movements measured, their outlines often broken by patterns that blend into sand, coral, and shifting light. A swimmer drifting above a reef may never realize one passed nearby. A fisherman pulling in a net may discover one only after it has already become entangled among the catch. For thousands of years, humans and sea snakes have shared the same waters across the Indo-Pacific, their lives intersecting far more often than formal records suggest. The deeper their story becomes, the more difficult it is to fit within simple categories. They breathe air, yet draw part of their oxygen directly through the skin. They evolved glands beneath the tongue to remove excess salt, while some species still depend upon rainwater for hydration. Their vision no longer resembles that of their terrestrial ancestors, having shifted toward the wavelengths that dominate underwater environments. Certain lineages appear capable of sensing light through the skin of the tail itself, gathering information from parts of the body that conventional vertebrate biology never intended as visual organs. Others descend into depths once thought inaccessible to air-breathing reptiles. Some coordinate hunts with fish, forming temporary partnerships that close every route of escape for prey hidden within the reef. Even their venom is not merely discharged automatically. In many encounters, they appear capable of modulating delivery according to circumstance, conserving valuable biological resources when envenomation serves no purpose. None of these adaptations required public attention to emerge. No film announced them, no cultural obsession elevated them into symbols. They became extraordinary regardless. The ocean did not wait for recognition before shaping them into what they are. It simply continued its work, patient and uninterrupted, while human narratives focused elsewhere. And perhaps that is the quiet lesson carried by these animals. The sea was never defined by the handful of creatures that captured collective attention. It was never limited to the stories repeated most often. Beneath those stories exists a larger reality, older than memory and more intricate than expectation. In that reality, sea snakes glide through warm water beside reefs and shorelines, carrying within their bodies the record of one of evolution's most remarkable journeys. They remain there still, neither seeking notice nor requiring it, living proof that the ocean we imagine and the ocean that truly exists have never been exactly the same place. The water was always deeper than the story, stranger than the story, and still filled with lives waiting beyond the edge of what we thought we knew.